Welcome, everybody, to the Rise and Fall Fantasy Football Show, Week 4 edition. I'm your host, Dave Sarner. I'm going to be talking to you about every single matchup and every single fantasy asset that you need to know about for your Week 4 matchups here this week. And this week is a special week for me. I am riding solo for the first time today. No co-host today. It will be a solo show where we are going to go over every Week 4 matchup. We added a couple more statistics to the game-by-game analysis this week. We wanted to make sure that we got your quarterback rankings, your running back rankings, your tight end rankings, and your wide receiver rankings for every single team in one place. These are things that you can get on Yahoo. You look at a player on your mobile app. Very similar things here, except I wanted to just break that down for you guys team by team, allow you to really see and get a holistic picture what each team is doing. And from there, we're going to go through the analysis and get you your picks for this week's matchups. On today's episode, we're going to go through the first 4 games on the schedule this week, starting off with the Thursday night game between the Broncos and the Jets. We then go into the Saints at the Lions, the Chargers at the Buccaneers, and we finish it off with the Jaguars at the Bengals. Now, before we get into the game-by-game analysis and break down our evaluation of this week's matchups, we wanted to get into the news and notes and updates that you need to be aware of for injuries in Week 4. In the Broncos at the Jets on Thursday Night Football, Brett Rypien is going to be your quarterback. There's really nothing to report new here. On the one side of things, it's a downgrade from Jeff Driscoll, but there is some optimism that next week for Week 5, Drew Lock may be back in the lineup. Now, for this week's matchup, Jamison Crowder for the New York Jets was limited on Tuesday. Not exactly a good sign on a short week, as was Phillip Lindsay. Both of them limited in Tuesday's practices, so we're going to have to get an idea of Wednesday's practices if they are going to go. If Crowder does go, I do have him as a really high candidate to potentially put up some really good points. 13 targets in Week 1, and then he was hurt for the last 2 weeks. He could have a big bounce back week if he's healthy. In the next matchup here, the only other news of notes that we have to report for you is for the Chargers at the Bucs game. Of course, we already know Chris Godwin is out for this week's game, as is Chris Harris on the other side of things for the Chargers. The star cornerback is out 4 to 6 weeks with a foot injury, so keep that in mind. They were already without Derwin James. Now they're out without Chris Harris, going up against a really good Bucs team. Mike Evans gets a pretty bump up. Maybe a tight end, maybe Scotty Miller. Outside of that, the Jaguars and Bengals are relatively healthy, as are the Saints or Lions. We'll get you more status updates on guys like Michael Thomas and see if he's going to be playing down the road, as well as DJ Chark for the Jaguars. We'll know a little bit more before game time, but at this point, there is no official update on those players. Those were all your news, notes, and updates on injuries for you for Week 4's matchups. Now, here is episode 1. Before we get into everything, I just wanted to say thank you those who hung out with me on the Sunday stream. We'll be doing live streams every Sunday. The Stardom Syndrome column will be there from 10 a.m. There will be times where I do hop on a little earlier where I'll just be doing lineups and doing DFS, having coffee. So these are things that if you guys want to come hang out, a little bit more of a chill, relaxed type of atmosphere. Perfect atmosphere for that kind of situation. So Sunday, 11 o'clock or 10 o'clock rather, so start a sim. 9:30 is when the stream's going to start. Feel free to come join us, guys. It's going to be a lot of fun. With that being said, I wanted to get into the matchups here for Week 4. And without further ado, we are here. Broncos at the Jets, the Thursday night game. We have 10 minutes on the clock. Let's get it started. In this matchup, it's going to be a very lackluster matchup, guys. Probably one of the most unexciting Thursday night games that I can think of in a really long time. And it would be a little better, obviously, if Drew Lock was going, if Cortland Sutton was going, if Jets had Le'Veon Bell. It would be intriguing. But even so, I'm still having trouble figuring out what the schedulers were thinking, putting this as the Thursday night. I mean, did they sit there and say, Thursday night game, Week 4, we have to have a premier game, right? Broncos Jets. I mean, it was probably the guy in the corner just screamed it out. You know what? Let's do that. Let's throw that in there. I just didn't understand the matchup itself. It's not really intriguing, even before the season, especially now. And even these stats are a little bit out of date. I am recording this Wednesday morning here. News did break last night, but I didn't feel like updating the chart here. Jeff Driscoll is not the starting quarterback for the Denver Broncos in this game, guys. Brett Rypien. Brett Rypien is your starting quarterback here for week 4 for the Denver Broncos. No Cortland Sutton, Philip Lindsay, we're still on the fence. We don't know what's going to happen with him. I believe either way, Melvin Gordon's supposed to get most of the carries, if not all the work. But guys, I loved Melvin Gordon this game, and I'll show you why in a second. And I still kind of do. I think you're going to have to start Melvin Gordon. He's I think if anyone's going to produce for this Denver team, it's going to be him. But Noah Fant, for me, definitely takes a little bit of a downgrade. Jerry Jeudy downgraded. I was really excited about him. I even took him out of my lineup to put in Preston Williams against Seattle. So that's a tough one for me, seeing Brett Ripien being the quarterback here. I did have some investment in that offense, so it is what it is. They didn't put up great points against the Bucs last week, 65.54. I do expect them to I thought they were going to put up more. But I just don't know now. I don't know what Brett Ripien brings you as your starting quarterback. So just be mindful if you're going to go with Melvin Gordon that, listen, game script, the turnovers might make this a weird game. But obviously, someone has to step up, right? And if there's any week that this team can still produce going into the game with quarterback Brett Ripien, I think it could be against the Jets. So that being said, I do like Melvin Gordon still. Be cautious with Brett Ripien. I don't know how the game flow is going to go. You're obviously not going to start your quarterback now. Jerry Jeudy definitely gets downgraded for this. I don't know what this rapport, if they have rapport, if they've even thrown a pass to each other. It's just hard to know right now. And even though it's the Jets, even though I get it, it's a good matchup. If I was you guys, go in Thursday night, do a DFS showdown game, do the two of them, throw Melvin Gordon in your lineup, maybe a KJ Hamler or something along those lines. If Crowder's playing, you throw him on that lineup. And maybe Denver's defense, as your captain or something along those lines. Maybe that works. That's really the only comfortability I have going over or utilizing any Broncos players this week. Meanwhile, on the other side of things, the Jets, again, you're going to phase out most of this team this week unless you have Jamison Crowder. Chris Herndon could be a potential here. And let's go. Reason why I'm saying that is because you have the Broncos and the Jets here. So let's take a look. So these rankings are what they do against other teams. So when it says the Jets are 20th for QB, it means that they are 20th against the QB position. So that means that Brett Ripien is going up against the 20th or the 12th best pass defense or defense against quarterbacks. Does that make sense? So when I say, the Jets are 20th against quarterbacks, they're 6th against running backs. Obviously, we highlight the same way that Yahoo does it. From 10 and up is in green. Mid-tier rounds are going to be in this gray, kind of bluish color. And then, obviously, we have in red 20s to 32s, the tougher ranked teams. So if you're looking at these matchups, the Broncos are actually the weaker defense of the two. The Jets aren't actually terrible when it comes to kind of playing positions. They do give up a lot of points to running backs, most likely because of the San Francisco game against them. Obviously, when they played the Bills, Josh Allen was able to rush on them. So they've had issues with that. That's why I do still love Melvin Gordon. Just be mindful, Brett Ripien, I don't know how that's going to truly change this offense this week. If there's turnovers, if the ball just can't move, if there's a non-existent pass game, think about 8 stack boxes against Melvin Gordon, and that might not be a great thing. That being said, Jets are 6th. They're giving up the 6th most points against running backs, so you're going to start Melvin Gordon, especially if Philip Lindsay doesn't go. And again, wide receiver, Jerry Jeudy, I'm fading out. Quarterback, I'm fading out. They're really actually pretty good against those two positions. Tight end, you can still go take a chance on Noah Fant. Just lower your expectations just a little bit. I don't know if he is going to be the stud this week. On the other side of things, you have the Broncos. They are 10th. They're giving up 10th most points in fantasy to quarterbacks, 5th most to wide receivers, and 9th tight end. What this tells me is Jamison Crowder, if he's healthy, you put him in your lineup. 13 targets in week 1 for 113 yards, or 115 yards rather, and a touchdown in week 1 when he was healthy. He is back this week. If he's back this week, start him up. Broncos are giving up the 5th most points against wide receivers. Listen, you want to take a flyer and DFS on Sam Darnold? Not a terrible play if Crowder and Perriman are going. Really, it's not a bad play. With Brett Ripien at quarterback on the other side, injuries on their end, it could be an interesting flyer night for Sam Darnold. If you're doing a DFS, throw down at Sam Darnold, maybe a little bit down on that list. Don't do a captain. I would say captain, do like Melvin Gordon, Jamison Crowder could be a good captain. Maybe one of the defenses, but I wouldn't trust that. And then at tight end, you could take a flyer on Chris Herndon this week. I personally don't trust Chris Herndon. He just never seems to produce what everyone thinks he's going to do. So me personally, I am going to phase out that area. So I am comfortable going back real quick. We have Jamison Crowder. If he's starting, you start him this week. 5th in points for the Broncos, so they're giving a lot of points to wide receivers. Noah Fant has a pretty good matchup this week, but the quarterback situation does scare me. Melvin Gordon is really my most comfortable play overall in this game, even with Brett Rypien at quarterback. I still think that maybe the Broncos do get it going on the run, because let's be real here. When we move here, 6 against the run, they have let a lot of points to opposing running backs, and I think that could happen again this Thursday. Now, going into the 1 o'clock games here, we have the Saints and the Lions. Saints are going into Detroit, where Detroit had actually an upset win last week over the Arizona Cardinals. I'll be honest, that was a complete surprise to me, but the Lions do this sometimes. They outplay their opponents sometimes. The better opponents, they'll give a challenge, and then they'll come back and stink it up, and then they'll have another game where they're pretty good. I actually think that this week that trend continues up for the Detroit Lions. Kenny Golladay coming back is a game changer for Detroit, in my opinion. Matthew Stafford's status goes up a little bit. His projection for me goes up a little bit, even against the Saints, guys. I understand. Listen, the Saints are really good. Don't get me wrong here. So you're going to have caution when you're looking at these Detroit Lions. You're obviously going to start Alvin Kamara. He's my most comfortable start in this game. Michael Thomas, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think he's still going to be out this week. If he's back, you're obviously going to start him. Just be mindful he might not be 100%. Jared Cook didn't really perform last week. 3 for 2 for 21 yards. Only 3 targets last week for him. Emmanuel Sanders, Traquan Smith actually led the way with 6 targets last week. I mean, if we're going to be realistic, Alvin Kamara led the way with 14 targets. But listen, if Kamara does things like this, especially while Michael Thomas is out, if you're a Kamara fan, you're hoping that Michael Thomas misses the entire year. Because while Kamara puts up awesome stats sometimes, I had him for like last 2-3 years. He's never done stuff like this. I mean, he puts up good points, but 14 targets, 13 receptions for 139 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, that's impressive. On the other side of things, a little news on this side. It was reported by the offensive coordinator for the Lions. I think it's Darren Rovell is their offensive coordinator now. Adrian Peterson is projected to be the main back moving forward. That he's going to be the main guy in front of DeAndre Swift and Kerryon Johnson. And while both of those guys could do some things, they mentioned that it is apparently Adrian Peterson's job to lose. Listen, I'm a Washington football fan, so I have a ton of respect and love for AP. Didn't think the Washington team should have cut him because I feel like obviously we could absolutely use him right now. But good to see him doing some really good things for the Lions, basically doing what he did for us. The production is somewhat there, 22 for 75. They gave him carries last week. He didn't get the overall yards or in the end zone, but apparently he's the guy. So Adrian Peterson, it's a very low-end RB2 or a very low-end RB3 flex, in my opinion. I'm not going to go out of my way to start him, but obviously, if you have him, you're going to keep him there, and he could be an interesting bye-week filler or something along those lines. The only guy I truly am I'm all in on is Kenny Golladay, maybe TJ Hawkinson. And the reason for that is, if you look at the Lions stats and the Saints stats, 2 things stick out to me. One, the Saints are giving up the most points to tight ends. The most tight ends this season. And that's including a team like the Packers who doesn't even use their tight ends. I mean, Robert Tonyan had a strong fantasy day because of that. So I think when you're looking at the Lions, you want to utilize TJ Hawkinson. So I have him up on my rankings just a little bit because, again, When you're going up against a team who's first against tight ends, that means the middle of the field's a little bit weaker, and I think that's where Stafford can attack them. The Saints dealt with some pretty high-powered offenses, but let's be real. The Packers receivers, while Devontae is fantastic, obviously, he was hurt in that game a little bit against the Lions, and let's be honest, listen, the Saints have better options there, so we'll see what happens. But I think TJ is going to break out this week. He's been consistent. He has a good floor. So he's going to get you a decent amount of points, maybe 7 to 8 fantasy points minimum. I like him this week as a high-end TE1 or mid-range TE1 rather. Stafford and Drew Brees, you start both of them. I actually like the matchups here. So the Saints are very deceiving from a quarterback perspective, but they are giving up the 5th most points to quarterbacks. This could be a hit or miss for Matthew Stafford. I'm personally going to take a chance on him this week over, say, a Gardner Minshew, who has a tougher matchup. And I'm going to go with him. As long as Kenny Golladay there, if they are healthy and he has weapons, I think he's going to get some things done. And I think he gets you a minimum of 19 to 20 fantasy points this week against this New Orleans defense. At the running back side of things, I'm not going to use Adrian Peterson in any of them, like we mentioned. 20th against the run is the Saints. 24th against wide receivers. Even though they are really well, they play good defense against the wide receiver position. I don't see myself taking out Kenny Golladay. He is wide receiver 1, if anything, a wide receiver 2 in this matchup. But still, you're going to start him. He changes that offense. He's explosive. He's dynamic. So you want to have him on your team, and you're going to have him in your lineup. On the other side of things, the Lions are 7th against quarterbacks, so Drew Brees, fire him up. 7th against running backs, Alvin Kamara, obviously a must start. And 10th against wide receivers. So they're giving up the 10th most points to wide receivers right now. And that's good news for Emmanuel Sanders and Traquan Smith. Now, tight end is a different story. Like I said, not a huge fan of Jared Cook this week. Reason being, Lions are pretty stingy against the tight end position. Their interior, the middle linebackers area, is actually pretty good in Detroit. So be mindful of that. I would lean Emmanuel Sanders. It seems like they finally got a little rapport, and they were trying to get him more involved last week. So he would be kind of my sleeper to go off. But my obvious ones for this week, Alvin Kamara, Drew Brees, Michael Thomas if he goes, of course. Emmanuel Sanders, you can feel good to fire him up if you need to. Matthew Stafford, I really like as a kind of a sleeper DFS play this week, in my opinion. People are going to be a little down because it's the Saints, but be mindful. They are pretty weak against the quarterback position. Kenny Golladay, even with a tough matchup, I like him. TJ Hockenson has a great matchup. I like him as well. Outside of all those, Marvin Jones could be an interesting, play if you need to. It just seems like when Kenny's in the lineup that it's the Kenny Golladay show, right? Outside of that, Latavius Murray, listen, like we said, 7th against running backs. Latavius Murray, if you're desperate and you need depth, could be someone you could throw in as a handcuff kind of guy, but don't go out of your way for that. Kamara, Brees, Thomas, okay, even Emmanuel Sanders, TJ Hockenson, Kenny Golladay, and Matthew Stafford are your guys for this matchup in week 4. On to the next one. Next up on the agenda is the Chargers visiting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the LA Chargers coming all the way here on the East Coast. We've seen what happens with East Coast teams and how they, our West Coast teams and how they fare on the East Coast side of things. So I think it could be a decent game for the Buccaneers overall, but I do think the Chargers are going to do some good things. If Justin Herbert is still starting at quarterback, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler are in your lineups. It's really that simple for the Chargers offense. If they're not, they're obviously still going to be in your lineup, but just don't be as excited about them. I don't think Tyrod's as effective as Justin Herbert. In my opinion, this team needs to stick with Justin Herbert. It doesn't make sense to go backwards. I get weird situation for Tyrod, weird situation for losing your job, but at the end of the day, man, you could just tell. I could tell just from week 1 to week 2 and 3, Justin Herbert makes that offense better. And, if you have that young franchise guy and he's already starting to produce and showing good signs, you play him. Trust me, I know this because I'm a Washington fan, and we're still seeing Dwayne Haskins really not overly developing into the guy that I'm hoping he's going to end up being. So I personally think they should stick with Justin Herbert. It looks like he's probably going to be the guy again this week. So feel good about firing up Austin Eckler. Feel good about firing up Keenan Allen. If you guys have watched this show at all in the last few weeks, you know I don't like Mike Williams. They keep projecting him double-digit fantasy points, and he keeps producing less than like 4 points. I don't like him again this week, and I'm going to continue to have him on my shit list, if you will, because I just don't think he's a good player. He's never healthy, and he never really gets a production. Hunter Henry is an interesting play. I don't necessarily love the matchup this week against Tampa Bay. They are a good defense, so be mindful. If you have Hunter Henry, you're probably going to start him. But there could be some better streaming options that might be able to surpass him on the rankings this week. Buccaneers. Tom Brady, you're probably going to end up starting if you have him, unless you have like a Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Lamar, Patrick Mahomes. Personally, in my league, I have Russell Wilson with Tom Brady on my bench. Yes, I know it's not conventional to have two quarterbacks on your roster, but for me personally, I like having that secondary backup quarterback. I personally have gotten screwed in some leagues for not having, let alone two quarterbacks, but one quarterback. So for me, I always like having that backup plan. And hey, you know what? In a 12-team league, I get it. Well, you don't need one if you have a good one. Yeah, but you know what? I'm also taking a good quarterback away from someone else potentially using him. And for me, I think that's a pretty good, strategy sometimes if you have two good ones. So I'm comfortable with my two guys. I'm not starting Tom Brady this week, though. Obviously, I'm going to continue to roll with Russell Wilson. The running back situation is all over the place. I have no idea who to recommend to you guys. I'd say the safe bet probably is Ronald Jones. But let's be real, Leonard Fournette could have a 20-point game this week, so we truly just don't know. At receiver, Chris Godwin is ruled out for this week. He may be missing multiple weeks. He had a pull. He had I think he had a hamstring pull or something along those lines. But it was a pull. Nothing too crazy, I don't think. So I do expect him maybe to be back next week, even though it was initially reported that he might miss multiple weeks. With that being said, though, Mike Evans, you're firing up. Whenever Chris Godwin's out, you fire up Mike Evans. Regardless, you're going to. But he's going to do more than 4 for 2 and 2 yards and a touchdown this week. He's going to be the premier guy. With him out, I do expect someone to step up here outside of Mike Evans. Is it going to be Scotty Miller? Is it going to be one of these tight ends? Well, let's take a look at the rankings and figure out maybe to see how this game script is going to go. The Buccaneers are really stingy against a lot of positions. Their weakest positional rank is the running back. They're giving up 12th most points to running backs this season so far. So obviously, like we said with the Chargers, Austin Eckler, you can feel good firing him up. I think he'll be all right. Justin Herbert, be cautious about starting him in particular, but Keenan Allen, if Herbert's going, you start Keenan Allen. I don't care about this matchup. He's going to get volume and targets, and that's what you want from number one receiver that can get in the end zone. On the Chargers side, so like we said, we wanted to see if a tight end is viable this week. It could be. I mean, listen, they're 19th against tight ends, so right in the middle of the pack, essentially. Middle of the pack for wide receiver ranking and quarterback ranking. Obviously, it's a decent matchup for Tom Brady. Listen, 15th against Mike Evans is a good matchup. I am a little worried that Chris Godwin, it's going to key in now on Mike Evans a little bit more. So maybe someone like a Scotty Miller might have a better game. But I expect it to be Mike Evans. Listen, you could take a risk on this. I personally think, and this is a bold prediction, that one of the tight ends for the Buccaneers is going to score this week. I am also predicting, more boldly, it's going to be Rob Gronkowski. So he could be, you're not going to play that at all, okay? Please don't play that in any of your lineups. I am just having a gut feeling. It's kind of my bold prediction of the week. So, with the recap going back to the Chargers, Keenan Allen, with even a tough matchup, you're going to start him as long as Justin Herbert is going. Austin Eckler, feel good about that. Now, again, we said Hunter Henry. Well, the Buccaneers are 23rd, giving up the 23rd least amount of points, or the 23rd most amount of points, rather, against tight ends. That's not great for Hunter Henry. So lower your expectations. It could be another 7-8 point week for him. And then at the end of the day, we also are going to probably phase out one of these tight ends for the Buccaneers, both of them. I do expect maybe one of them to potentially score this week. So we'll see how that turns out for them. Chris Godwin is out. Mike Evans, you start. Ron John and the running backs here for the Buccaneers. Listen, 30th against running backs. I am phasing out Tampa Bay's running backs this week. I don't know what the heck the matchup's going to be or who is going to be the guy. So I'm phasing that out. Austin Eckler, you fire up. And even in a deeper league, maybe a Josh Kelly if you needed to. Don't go out of your way for that, though. Next on the list, we have the Jacksonville Jaguars heading to Cincinnati to play the Bengals in another 1 o'clock matchup. The Bengals are coming off a tie against the Eagles, 23-23, while the Jacksonville Jaguars are coming off a tough loss on Thursday Night Football against the Miami Dolphins. Now, Gardner Minshew definitely let me down this week, guys. I was pretty high on him. I was hoping that he was going to produce. But I'll be real with you. The second I saw DJ Chark go down or was reported out for this game, that absolutely concerned me. It definitely lowered my initial value about Gardner Minshew in my head. So I was a little less excited, and rightfully so. This offense just doesn't run correctly without DJ Chark in the lineup. So when you're looking at this football team moving forward, the good trends are, you have DJ Chark, you put him in, he's going to be targeted. James Robinson, even if it's a negative game script kind of week, you're going to throw him in. What I love about seeing 27 or 28 points for James Robinson is it wasn't a game where they were behind and they needed to pass the ball and get points on the board. 6 for 6 for 83 yards for James Robinson. He outproduced Chris Thompson, who had the same amount of targets, but only had 5 for 35. I really like James Robinson. You can start him as an RB2 and feel comfortable, even if the matchup is a tough one. Unless they are really stingy against the run, like the 32nd ranked run defense, maybe I would be a little bit down on him. But this week, we're not dealing with that. So you fire up James Robinson, feel comfortable with that. DJ Chark is a guy you're going to start if you have him. Gardner Minshew, we'll see. We'll take a look at the rankings and see if it's worth the start. Joe Burrow puts up 20 points, 312 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Meanwhile, in Philadelphia, Joe Burrow's looked much better. Week by week, he's progressed, and he's starting to look like a really, really, really strong quarterback, starting to put up some better fantasy performances, too. So this could be another game that he starts here for you if you have him, unless you have one of the elite guys. Joe Burrow is not a terrible option for you guys here. A guy who I'm not as high on, again, for the 4th straight week, Joe Mixon, guys. Listen, 18 points projected. A little high. All right. He has not produced this year. He's looked mediocre. He's gotten games like this, 17 for 49. It's a typical game for Joe Mixon. He's a good running back, but he's not amazing. Sorry, just not. Not worth the high round pick. Not worth the lack of production that he gives you. And it's just not worth it in general. A little disappointing. Thought this kid would go off in what I thought was going to be a higher, performing or higher octane offense, if you will. And it has been. It's starting to be that a little bit more. But Joe Mixon, man, I just don't trust him. I don't like him. It's going to be tough for me to ever recommend starting him over some of these other guys. Like, I'd rather take a chance on a guy who's a little lower on the rankings who might be a riser. Joe Mixon is like the constant faller. And he's a permanent resident, it feels like, on my shit list. So, wide receiver, you have Tyler Boyd. Okay, 13 targets. We saw the volume finally for Tyler Boyd. It was something that we were hoping to see. No touchdown, but hey, 13 targets, 10 receptions, 125 yards. If he continues to give that production, that's a great start for you. You can be more comfortable moving forward with him. He should put up similar type of production on a week-to-week basis. Not 17 points maybe, but in terms of target share, in terms of volume, he should still get that. And it's good to see that because that's what his big asset was last year that a lot of people were very worried about this year. And he kind of quelled that a little bit this week. I expect that to maybe go in the same range this week. T. Higgins, 5% owned. I have him highlighted as a waiver wire addition if people picked him up. Be mindful, though, that it is a lot of heads or a lot of mouths to feed, rather, in Cincinnati. You have A.J. Green, Tyler Boyd, John Ross, Mike Thomas, and now T. Higgins. But T. Higgins, in my opinion, is the most valuable for long-term outside of Tyler Boyd. He is going to be a proponent of this team. We're already seeing a good rapport with Joe Burrow. He's an explosive rookie. I mean, people forget T. Higgins was a really good receiver coming out also, except that this class was just a really good class. You had Justin Jefferson, Ruggs, Judy, Ayuk. You had a lot of guys in front of him. And yet T. Higgins was an amazing receiver. In a lot of other years, he could have potentially went in the first round also. So Bengals, keep an eye on T. Higgins. I did see on some of the waiver wire, at least in my leagues, that even with that game, not many people picked him up right now, and rightfully so. They just don't know what the depth is going to be like there, and it's understandable. But at the same time, listen, he could be that potential if you can afford to have him stashed on your bench late. He's worth an ad, especially in, say, like a 14, 16-team league. 12-team, again, I'm sure there's someone, that you probably don't like. If there's someone you just don't really care for on your bench that you feel like you're never going to use, T. Higgins could be a good pickup. Now, going into the stats, though, we have the Bengals, who are really weak against... So the Bengals are really weak against the run. Okay, 5th in points for that they're giving up to the running back. Like we said, James Robinson, you're gonna fire him up this week and feel good about it. There's no reason why you're not gonna put him in. Now, he could disappoint to a degree a little bit. I don't think he puts up 27 points again. But listen, the Bengals are pretty damn weak against a running back, and we've seen teams go off on them. So he is my pick of the week for this matchup. From the Jaguars side. On the Bengals side of things, okay, listen, disclaimer from my end, I recommended Drew Sample last week. He didn't do anything last week. But I think I might recommend him one more week. Now, I'm not saying you go out and you put him in your lineup and you start him over a Zach Ertz or a Hayden Hurst even. But he could be a sneaky DFS play. I'm going to put one lineup, maybe $1 lineup to see if it works with Drew Sample in there. Jaguars are 3rd in points in points against tight ends. So tight ends are scoring a lot of points against them. 6th most points against quarterbacks. So obviously Joe Burrow, you fire up as well. We like him this week. And granted, listen, like we said, Joe Mixon has been underwhelming. Now, while it's a decent matchup, 13th in most points against running backs, I still don't like the matchup. I think unless he's going up against a top 5 point producer on that side of things, I'm not a huge Joe Mixon guy. Wide receiver, Tyler Boyd, T. Higgins. This is why I say T. Higgins could have his tick down. They are 20th against the pass, so be careful about that. However, we did see Ryan Fitzpatrick do some really good things last week. We saw Devontae Parker get involved. I do think Tyler Boyd gets some volume this week, maybe even a touchdown. It's hard for me to predict anyone else here. It's a tough position. I guess my deepest projection is maybe Drew Sample against this Jaguars defense. He might be a good option. Now, I know he had a down week last week, but the week before, Tyler Eifert goes down, or who is it? CJ Uzomah, goes down after he scores a touchdown in the Thursday night special. And guess what? Drew Sample comes in, 9 targets, 7 catches, only 40-something yards, so obviously it wasn't huge, but 9 targets, and that's a lot of mouths to feed. And listen, if the receiving game doesn't work this week, and there's a chance it will struggle a little bit, this could be a good week for a Drew Sample to maybe even stack up a Joe Burrow and a Drew Sample for a pretty cheap price in DraftKings, and allows you to fill up your lineup with a couple more studs.
Sitting throwing rocks across the pavement.